In 1957, there was a Soviet village called Kyshtym, a place so cursed that a warning board outside still reads, "Do not stop your vehicle. Stopping here means death." But this village was not always like this. On the night of September 29, 1957, when everyone was peacefully asleep, a thunderous explosion shook the ground. People rushed out of their homes, confused and terrified. Above them, the sky glowed with an eerie orange cloud swirling like a burning eye. Nearby stood a government factory, so villagers assumed it was a small accident. They had no idea that the glowing cloud they were staring at children, elders, families would write death into the destiny of every living being in Kyshtym from the very next day. Strange illnesses began spreading through the village. People developed fever, migraines, and mysterious burns. Weird patches appeared on their skin, and soon after, they died. Birth rates dropped. The few babies that were born were severely deformed, missing limbs, missing eyes, weak bodies, damaged minds. At night, the soil and river water sparkled with glowing particles. Everyone knew something unnatural was happening, but no one knew why, or how deadly it truly was. Today's story is about that very disaster, the Kyshtym explosion, one of the most horrifying nuclear events in human history. Let's begin. Thick fog covered the silent mountains. A lonely road twisted through the Ural region of Russia, glowing faintly under old warning signs telling drivers not to stop under any circumstances. Beneath this land lies one of the darkest secrets ever, buried. Our story goes back to 1946. The world had just come out of World War II, and nations were racing to show military supremacy. After America showcased the atomic bomb, Stalin ordered the Soviet Union to build its own nuclear might. This command gave birth to a hidden city that existed on no map. Chelyabinsk 40, at its heart stood the Mayak plant, where plutonium was produced non-stop. It was a city behind barbed wire. People lived like prisoners. Workers and prisoners toiled under the threat of death, forced to stay silent. Every house had guards. Every movement was watched. Underground, giant tanks stored liquid radioactive waste. Cooling pipes were installed to keep temperatures low, but maintenance hardly existed. All pressure was on producing uranium faster, not on safety. By 1957, the tanks were so overloaded that even a small mistake could trigger disaster. And the mistake did happen. Tank No. 14 had not received cooling water for months. Technicians repeatedly warned that temperature was rising dangerously. Higher officers ignored them. They wanted uranium, not safety. On September 29, 1957, at 4:20 p.m., the temperature inside Tank 14 hit 350 degrees Celsius. Moments later, a colossal explosion tore through the plant. The 160-ton concrete lid blasted into the air. A tornado of fire, smoke, and radioactive dust shot into the sky, creating that haunting orange cloud the villagers saw. But the villagers thought it was just another small accident. They did not realize that while they watched the glowing sky, radioactive particles were quietly entering their lungs, their blood, their DNA. The radiation released was even more deadly than what later emerged from Chernobyl. Strong winds that night carried the toxic cloud across 300 kilometers, poisoning thousands of people while they slept. But Kyshtym suffered the worst. Villagers had no idea their bodies were being filled with cesium-137 and strontium-90 nuclear poisons that would destroy them and future generations. Within hours, soldiers surrounded the plant. Workers who had received lethal radiation doses disappeared, removed so no evidence remained. Newspapers published a fake story calling it a rare natural light phenomenon. But villagers could already see the truth. By morning, everything had changed. The soil smelled metallic. Leaves looked burnt. River water tasted like metal. People suffered headaches, vomiting, fatigue. Then they began to die. Government officials soon arrived, but revealed nothing. They burned crops, sealed wells, and buried devices in fields to measure radiation secretly. Some areas showed radiation levels 10,000 times above the maximum safe limit. The government issued a top-secret order: evacuate immediately, but do not tell them why. Villagers were taken away at night with no explanation, no belongings. They believed it was a temporary military drill. But then came the most horrifying turn. The Soviet government declared the village a nature reserve, promised new homes, promised compensation, and then gave nothing. After years of waiting, confused and frustrated, many villagers returned to Kyshtym, still unaware of the real danger. They rebuilt their homes, worked in fields, cooked food from the poisoned soil, unknowingly welcoming death back into their lives. Soon, sickness struck again. Miscarriages increased. Children were born without limbs, with damaged brains, with twisted spines. Official doctors examined them, but real reports went straight to the military. Death certificates were forged. The truth was buried. Families were told, cause of death, lung infection. But the real cause was the radioactive dust that had quietly destroyed their bodies from within. By 1960, the scale of the catastrophe had become impossible to hide. Nearly 200,000 people across the region had already been affected by the invisible poison spreading through the land. Secret tests conducted by Soviet scientists revealed an even darker truth. The soil of this village was thousands of times more radioactive than normal. Living here wasn't dangerous, it was a death sentence. And yet, the Soviet government still refused to evacuate the people. Instead, they offered free medical checkups, tiny pensions, and small welfare schemes, indirectly forcing the villagers to stay in this toxic zone. But why? Why keep innocent citizens trapped in a radioactive wasteland? The answer was terrifyingly simple: experiments. The Soviet state. These villagers were no longer people. They had become walking test subjects, living specimens for studying the long-term effects of lethal radiation exposure. Every few weeks, teams of scientists arrived wearing fully sealed nuclear suits, accompanied by armed soldiers. They collected blood samples from sick children, took x-rays of dying adults, recorded deformities, monitored symptoms, all while the villagers believed this was free medical help. From the government, they never realized they were part of a secret, inhuman study. Villagers also noticed other strange things at night. The fields and riverbeds glowed with tiny sparkling particles, radioactive dust that shimmered eerily in the darkness. Some thought it was a strange mystery. Others believed the land had been cursed by a demon. But there was one boy in the village who refused to believe the lies. He wanted answers. He wanted to uncover the truth behind the deaths, the illnesses, the deformities, and the government's silence. That boy was Gusman Kabirov, born in March 1958. He entered a world scarred by a disaster his people were never told about. As he grew up, he noticed things others ignored. Villagers were always sick. Children were born weak or deformed. Farm workers died young. And across the village, a silent fear hung over everyone's face. After school, Gusman often sat alone by the river, wondering why the water felt so calm while something deep inside him felt restless. Over time, he realized the sickness around him wasn't natural. Something was deeply wrong. Then came 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union. For the first time, hidden documents leaked out. Newspapers published shocking reports. People discovered that decades earlier, a nuclear explosion had poisoned the region. For Gusman, it was like finding the final missing piece of a puzzle. Everything suddenly made sense. He made a decision. He would expose the truth to the world. Gusman bought a simple device, a Geiger counter, used to detect radiation. Every day at sunrise, he walked across the village holding the device close to the soil. Whenever the beeping grew louder, his heartbeat raced with it. He collected samples from fields, houses, riverbanks, dozens of them. Every test revealed the same thing. The soil and air were filled with radiation at levels far beyond what any human body could safely endure. He stored all the data carefully. His wife Milia recorded every reading and date in a notebook. They documented villagers' illnesses, how many infants died, how many women miscarried, how many young people fell sick after the explosion. Slowly, Gusman built a detailed report, evidence that exposed decades of government deception. In 1996, he formed an organization called the Geiger Group, named after the river whose waters were now contaminated with radioactive waste. They began educating villagers about the truth. More people joined. Together, they wrote letters to government offices, sent reports, demanded justice. But the government responded with silence. Soon they were placed under surveillance. Officials followed them. Sometimes, they were threatened. But Gusman refused to stop that. As his findings spread, foreign journalists and international scientists became aware of the case. Many traveled to Kyshtym themselves. When they conducted their research, the results horrified them. They could not believe human beings were still living on such poisonous land. Global agencies published articles under the name the Kyshtym Disaster, calling it one of the worst nuclear tragedies in history. Some international forums even declared the region a level 6 nuclear disaster, just one step below Chernobyl. But even after the truth went global, the Russian government's attitude hardly changed. They introduced some relief schemes on paper, offered small compensation, promised new houses, but most of it never materialized. Those who were relocated were moved only a few kilometers away into areas still contaminated with dangerous radiation. As always, without real support and without fertile land to farm, villagers slowly returned to their old homes, accepting radiation as their fate. According to studies by the World Health Organization and the IAEA, people living here today still survive in high radiation zones. Their bodies have adapted partially over generations, but outsiders visiting the area can receive doses strong enough to cause deadly cancers. Even now, radiation-related diseases and cancers are widespread throughout the village. And here's something surprising. India has a village with a similar fate, where uranium mining beneath the land has caused deformities in children and mysterious illnesses among villagers. That place is Jajigoda in Jharkhand. If you want a full, detailed episode on how uranium mining has affected the people of Jajigoda, tell me in the comments below. If we cross 2,000 comments, I'll definitely make a complete video on it. If you learned something new or found this story shocking, make sure to like and share this video. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more history that the world tried to hide.